There, that would make for a good thumbnail, probably. Where, I mean, these things are so small, no one will notice them. Anyway, what exactly do I have here? And please pay attention because I kicked up the exposure to the max and I did not cut my nails just so that you can see the things that I'm pointing to. Although it's going to be hard because, yeah, these are so small, they'll probably go out of focus. However, here, if you've been around the block a time or two, you will know that these are basically two saddles for what is mostly known as a Strat type guitar, potentially like even Strat. This one is like a Squire versus a Fender one, and people refer to them either as vintage style saddles, and yeah, they kind of do get out of focus. But just Google, if you will, bent steel saddles, and yeah, that's the other name. So vintage style saddles or bent steel saddles. It's this. Well, basically, the name says it all. Is this tiny sheet of metal that's basically just turned around, and then here it has like a whoop, like a sort of U. It's basically a sheet of metal that's bent. That's why it's a bent steel saddle. And the other one, the more modern approach, which is opposing the traditional one, is the so-called block saddle. Multiple variations of these things, but essentially it's just a die-cast block which serves the same main purpose. The adjustment is exactly the same via these two tiny hex screws in the front. And yeah, basically the string comes from underneath, passes over the front tip here, and that's basically your virtual start of the string itself. That's where the vibration pattern should start from in terms of considering like the one end of the string. Now, I wanted to basically talk about the pros and cons, and mainly this will go into like why I hate and I love this versus this, and also why you should avoid one or the other. But at the end of the day, I cannot promise that this will be an unbiased thing, because basically the conclusion will be just one. And without spoiling the end, let's gently try to go there. So let's start with this one. This one is the bent steel saddle. As I said, it's just a sheet of metal that's bent. Now, people like it because it's vintage style saddle. You find it on all the expensive Fenders and whatnot, especially like the 50s, the 60s, 70s. Fenders, yeah, you cannot see because, as I said, I kept my nails long for pointing things out, but apparently to no avail because, yeah, it fails to focus. Anyway, this one is from a Fender. It has the Fender logo written all over it, but you can find it without this thing at all. So people like it for the looks, and in my opinion, that's basically where it should stay. Because see now, the problem with this thing is that since it's a sheet of metal that's being bent, it suffers from a lot of things. Now, first of all, you might wonder why I have this thing open. I mean, just isolated one. It's because I have a bunch of them that no longer work. What do I mean by this? First thing is that, again, since they're so thin, it's basically one sheet. I know I keep repeating this, but this is very important. The thread the depth of the thread, the actual thread winding that you can put through such a thin material is so not deep to the point where basically you can get a faulty one, or a good one can become faulty after just a few turns. And I don't mean bad turns from people who don't know what they're doing. So basically, from the way this thing is bent and put into place and then drilled, you have a hole here for the intonation and also for holding the saddle in place, and you have these two here for adjusting the action. These can quickly mess up, like I said, in the thread itself for the screw. And what happens is the screw can no longer bite onto the thread because there's only like a mil or so. So only like a 1 turn and a half of actual, thread on the inside of these holes before they just exceed the depth of the sheet of metal. That makes them very susceptible for just getting broken as they are, and that's why I have this one. You'll say, well, what about this one? No, this one actually is from a brand new package. I just removed one of them to compare one by one, but these almost never have such a problem. Of course, if they're poor quality, even with such a thing, you can experience problems. They can exhibit problems with their threading for the screws. But basically, I mean, for this one, this hole, yeah, now my nail finally becomes useful. Although it's not that big of a deal. I think you could have seen it without. This whole space right here is basically just going through the block. And there's plenty of bite to happen. It is out of focus, but you know what I mean. So that whole thing is allowing for, like, it's kind of like half a centimeter, like 5 millimeters of just windings on the thread. Here also, the entire height basically consists of having an inward thread, whereas with this one, please, again, I mean, don't let it fool you. Don't look at it like this and think, there's so much material. No, look at the side. It's just that tiny tip at the very end. So from that point of view, screwing this thing is a problem. The screws can become loose, and I mean, on the front they might wobble, whatever, which is another thing I'll talk about. But on the back, there's a lot of pressure. Even on the top here, I mean, there's the pressure of the string pressing down once you're fully tuning it up. And from here, again, it's the pressure of the string pulling the saddle that way. So you cannot just get away. That's basically the point I'm trying to make. You cannot just get away with the screw kind of biting into the thread. There's a lot of pressure here. So the winding, the thread itself will basically eat itself out very, very quickly. Now, the other thing that I mentioned here is the wobble. So this thing right here is kind of like, has quite a bit of a screw left on the top here. Let me put it like this in the light. And yeah, the rest of it is through the bottom. What happens is that usually, I mean, the lower you want to put the saddle, the better it is for the wobbling, because it goes away, because most of the screw is on the top, and yeah, you just have like a little bit of a screw left down here. But also, just as a side note, you cannot have that much of a low thing, because then the tip of this lip right here will basically touch, and it doesn't matter if you further remove the screws up, because they'll basically sit on this platform. But anyway, what I was saying is, if you remove these things, I mean, not removing it, if you have to place your saddle low for like the high E or something like this, then you'll have a lower action there, and you'll probably not experience that much of a wobble. But usually where the top of the crown is for the frets, and you have to adjust your action higher, like for the D and the G strings, there you will have to basically push these screws further down so that they can start protruding downwards and push the saddle up. The more you're approaching the end of the turns, and like you're kind of using up the length of the screw right here, uh, the more the more problems you risk having, especially if these you know screws and the holes through which they go, if they're not snug fit, you'll have severe issues, because what happens is, again, the screws, I mean, it's one thing. So imagine that this is the screw and this is kind of like the tiny hole it has to go through. I know this is like a stupid analogy visually, it looks very awkward, just ignore it. Like when the thing is kind of like this, not that much place to wobble. But actually, when you're holding it from like here, this thing can cause a lot of problems, because basically any slight give that the hole has with the thread inside, with the windings on the thread, if it's not perfectly snug, and that's kind of like an issue, because if it's too snug, you kind of have problems when you're trying to screw that thing through the hole. If it's not perfectly snug, any sort of leeway, any micrometer, whatever, starts getting heavily, revealed or accelerated in terms of its influence. So this thing can really start wobbling. As I said, the more you're lowering it, the harder it is. But anyway, you'll experience this as sudden drops of your saddle, especially if you're not careful. And I did this explicitly with this one. This one, if it would focus, you would see that one leg is shorter than the other in terms of where they sit. If you don't align them properly, I mean, in such a case, you would either get like a skewed saddle, or the saddle will kind of fake its position and stay somewhat upright, especially because of the side pressure from the other saddles. But one leg will be up in the air and there will be nothing underneath. And basically, you will experience either weird rings and you'll think it's somewhere from the frets or from the nut or whatever, or you will experience some sort of a hollow, out of phase sound, or you will experience basically just tuning issues, or at one point it will just drop and it will fuck up your action and sometimes even intonation. And all around, it can create a variety of problems that I don't even want to get into. I just wanted to mention some of them briefly. So all in all, when you're having bent steel saddles, I know they look very professional. I mean, these things, unless they have a cool design, this super silvery, streaky pattern reminds you of the super cheap ones from like the Squires or the even no-name guitars out there. Believe it or not, they're actually higher quality than the bent steel saddles. I know people will basically disagree with this. I also preferred for many years to have the bent steel saddles, especially because back in my earlier days when I only had cheap guitars, I never had these things. I could never afford them. There are some cheap guitars out there with bent steel saddles, because actually it would make sense that these are cheaper to produce, but depends on the technology and the alloys. Die casting blocks is also very cheap. I know you're used to seeing these on cheaper guitars and you associate them with a cheaper look. I also suffer from this problem, but actually this is the cheaper one, although you see it on premium vintage guitars and whatever. And the last bit of a problem, I mean, it's kind of like a two-part problem again. Here at the tip of the saddle, where the string wants to basically exit the saddle region and just float freely, just at that final point of contact. I can't really show you properly, but probably at this, let me hold it against something darker like this. You will probably see that, that region in between those two screws is perfectly smooth. Like it's this perfect reverse U, but it's also like this flat tube, going like this. Again, sorry for the gestures, but you know what I mean. It's kind of going like this. You might say that's not a problem. Where well, that is the fact that left to right from one screw to another, it's perfectly smooth, gives you the problem of not having one fixed place to stay. Now I know that the string will basically set itself into place once you put it there, and you have to be careful because it doesn't naturally just set itself in the middle of the saddle. You kind of have to guide it with your hand, with your nail, with like a screwdriver, especially if the string is already under tension. So you kind of need to put it there, and usually it will stay there, but sometimes it doesn't, especially with bends and stuff like that, or with whammy usage. And if you don't take care of that thing manually, basically you'll have uneven distance in the like between your strings. Some people don't notice it visually. Also, they don't notice it playing wise, but usually that's where you start noticing it. There's something odd about the string spacing. Now, like I said, once you put it there, usually it kind of stays. And if you made sure to put the string in the right place ever since the saddle was new, over time it will kind of dig its own groove there, and it will sort of have like a small groove, like a small slot from changing strings and from using the strings back and forth when tuning and whatever. It will dig that ditch. Now, problem is if you're not careful with the correct position, that ditch will be dug in the wrong place. And oftentimes I see on secondhand guitars, that thing is already settled, and you want to correct it and put it in the center, but guess what? The center is flat, smooth, whereas maybe one or two mils to the left or to the right, there's that groove, and the string now naturally slides over in the wrong place, and there's nothing you can basically do except for starting to file this thing down, modify it, and then fix it basically, or just replacing it. So that's one problem. This left to right sideways adjustment is a problem because it doesn't have that fixed place to stay in. And when you're looking at from the side, there's the other dimension. It's that thing that I said. It's like this. And like the top crown, like if you just look at it like this, that top crown, just the way it goes like this. That top of the reverse U, that camel hump, is way too, let's say, long, way too wide, way too thick, whatever. Depending on how you look at it and what position, doesn't matter if you deem it as length or width or whatever. Certainly not height. That very slow curving plateau is a problem for you guessed it, intonation. Because the string actually doesn't have one precise point of contact. Just like for the frets, that's why you want to have nicely defined crowns for your frets, and usually you want to have that peak culminate like on a point as much as possible, and that's why when your frets are worn and used, you kind of have that trapeze looking shape, and basically anywhere on that plateau the string basically makes contact, so it's kind of not good because you're moving away from the center towards the bridge. This time around, it's kind of like the same thing, moving towards the nut. Basically, it influences the intonation. Granted, you still have that screw on the back. It's kind of like this screw that goes here with like the spring that allows for adjustment. The idea is, this has to be taken into account, and also the fact that it offers too much of a plateau. Sometimes the acoustic perception of it, which is what you're interested in at the end of the day, because it's a musical instrument. Sometimes you hear those weird dull notes or some rings or some ring or whatever in like in the way the strings sound, especially with open strings. Whereas just in case you're asking, how does this cheap piece of crap solve my problems? Well, this piece of crap actually, although from the side it looks like it would never solve it, actually, if you look at what you have here, basically, again, it's hard with it being out of focus. But I try to have like a super saturated exposure just in case it's needed. I'll just try to get myself a pen here, and just in case you don't see it, but if you have like any guitar that has this, you know what I'm talking about. If not, just Google block steel, just block saddles, not necessarily steel, but anyway. Here there's this groove already etched into the saddle from the way in which it's die cast. Not only is it here, but it's actually going all the way inside through this canal from which the string emerges, basically, and that helps alleviate completely that problem of left and right, swagging, basically just wagging its tail left and right. So now it sits into place. It can no longer move left and right, and also, again, it's kind of hard to show it on camera, but you will see that although this thing looks like endlessly long, and it doesn't look like it solves that last problem that I talked about with the intonation, you will see that basically the string emerges like out on an angle, and this is kind of like the interior of what happens here inside this canal. It basically emerges out at an angle, and at the very end of the saddle, basically it comes out. There's that groove that I was talking about, like in this way, this dimension, on this axis, like the Z, if you're watching the camera right now. And then there comes the abrupt end of the saddle. So basically it pinpoints that point of contact with the string at a much higher degree. So it actually, believe it or not, it's a much better solution, although it might not be preferred for the way it looks. But also, to be honest, like I said, in the past, I used to love the bent steel saddles just because I never had them, and they were like this novelty for me in terms of having more expensive guitars. I no longer tend to look at the block saddles as something that looks cheap. I kind of got used to it, and actually, if you take steel, like block steel saddles, they basically look much more professional than any type of saddle. Not only this one, but also this one. This already becomes like some cheap bent garbage when you compare it to like the block steel saddles. And just to give you an example, like this is yes, it's still a Squire, but it's the deluxe. And as you can see, it has this sort of matte finish, and not only that, but it looks much more professional. Like it's really like a much better looking saddle. Granted, it's exactly, construction wise, it's exactly like this. It just looks a bit more professional because it has that solid matte finish, and it's actually made out of steel. Instead of some cheaper alloys. But actually, when you have the blocks like this, it no longer matters that much if the alloy is super high grade or not. And also with that wobble that I talked about, with the two legs kind of starting to wobble when you're approaching the limit of where you need to raise the action. This also gets eliminated because now this thing is no longer just like an optical illusion. It's not just tall here, but actually hollow on the side, and yeah, it's basically going through the whole depth of the saddle itself. It's exactly the same thing that I discussed when it comes to the intonation, and also the intonation screw, and also the screw that holds it into place. Whereas with this, again, just as a recap, as you can see just the amount of travel it has before it exits, which is super small. And also here, again, you can see that basically, although from the front it gives you the solid appearance, from the side it really isn't. So that being said, I mean, again, playing wise, a lot of things happen, both sonically and also mechanically. Still like the way these look on a vintage guitar, and I know that these will not look right. So, in my opinion, the verdict is pretty much simple. If you're building a guitar from scratch and it doesn't necessarily have a vintage look, unless you still want to keep your prejudice, you'd have to be quite a fool, to put it easily, in order to go for a bent steel saddle. You should definitely go for a block. This is not a matter of preference. This is a matter of what actually makes sense from a playing perspective, from a physics perspective, from a sonic experience point of view. All those things that we already discussed, and I don't want to reiterate through them. However, also again, stylistically, if you're building a vintage looking thing, these are bad for those points that we covered, but they're also not that bad to the point where you cannot live with them. They're actually doing their job right, especially if you know how to take care of things when you're doing the setup. I had them, I still have them, so yeah, it's vintage construction. It's stuck in the minds of people because they were the first ones to appear, and now they're associated with the vintage guitars. They have a lot of sentimental value and also market value, but design-wise, just like with many designs throughout the years, they prove themselves to be quite stupid. Gibson's angle in the strings, with the strings not exiting the nut at a zero angle, that proved to be a disaster, especially with the famous G problem, like the G string problem. And no, not that G string, the guitar G string. Whereas Fender had that down from the very beginning, no problems there. Also, the thing with like the headstock angle, thus, I mean, their Fender kind of screwed it up, and Gibson kind of had it right because Gibson doesn't need a string retainer, whereas Fenders kind of do. They don't really need it, but they kind of do. The two pneumatic issues, like the truss rod being at the bottom of the neck and you having to remove the neck. Again, completely stupid design choices, which at that time had no better solution. Then people got smarter really quickly and they fixed all these problems, but because they were there for quite a while, now people think those are the best designs. Same with the bridge choices, which with the saddle choices, with the bridges themselves. They had the 6-point screws and the 2-point screws, and the locking versus the non-locking. Not saying that the locking one is the better choice. I actually have a much older video explaining why the locking solution is not only overkill but also not that good as you think. But anyway, just to review some of the design choices, even with the pick guards, I mean, normally it's a stupid idea to have a pick guard because, first of all, why would you need it? I mean, just like mechanically, you don't need a piece of plastic to hold your electronics. And although you might say, yeah, I prefer to have them all bound on a piece of plastic, it's stupid because now if you have a problem with a pot or with a pickup or whatever, now you need to basically remove the strings and unscrew so many things. Whereas with a normal wood mount, or even not wood mount, just with with normal pickup rings, which again are stupid because you don't need them. Wood mount is the best. Anyway, if you don't have a pick guard, point in discussion is you don't need a pick guard for the pickups. You can do a back route mounting just like the Gibson always had, and basically you can fix whatever you want there. These are things you never think about, and now you even like the fact that the Strat, for example, has a pick guard. The Strat doesn't really look that good without a pick guard, but yeah, it kind of became de facto look, the de facto look for many models, even for tellies and whatever. And now they kind of look odd, but from an engineering standpoint, they're just complete brain farts, stupid design choices. Anyway, that was it for today for the saddles. Sorry for the huge rant. Is one of my longest rants ever on a technical topic or issue. Sorry for the huge exposure and my long nails. I wanted to make a point on cam, but apparently it didn't go as well as I thought. But anyhow, just to end this video on a different angle so you can see my face because you haven't already. And let's fix a bit the exposure. Yeah, let me know what you think, how much you hate me for once again making a whole big deal out of some myths. And these myths you probably like, and you don't want to negate them or deny them, or I'm not sure, just part ways with them. I know I might have struck some nerves with a lot of you guys. Sorry. Hit the dislike button if that's the case, or unsubscribe, although chances are you're not really subscribed. So yeah, leave me any comment down below. I'll be more than happy to read it, whether it's agreeing with me or not. That's not the point. And until next time, see ya. I'm out.